by blood hydrostatic pressure. On the drawing, you will see it called capillary hydrostatic. It's the same thing, exactly. And like I say, that leaves the larger materials in the bloodstream, and lets the smaller stuff be filtered out. And it is a, excuse me, folks, it's a mechanical filtration process. Now, reabsorption, I think filtration is the easiest concept here to understand. But it sounds funny too. It's a really strange sound to it. Yes.
I'm sure you're going to discuss it with this particular slide, but when we were talking about the different pressures, the osmotic pressure is drawing in for reabsorption, but when they call it colloidal osmotic pressure,
that's just a fuller name for it. They call it colloidal because it's a colloidal solution. And let me explain that a little bit too. I didn't want to get too much into that, but that's okay. Colloidal solution is just a water-based, generally a water-based solution with large molecules such as protein that's dissolved in them, as opposed to a regular, ordinary true solution that would be like salt or sugar or something like that. They have different properties. A perfect example of a colloidal solution that we've probably seen or dealt with would be things like milk. Of course we've seen dealt with milk, but I was thinking like Jell-O. Jell-O was made, of course it solidifies, because you cool it down, but that gelatin solution, anything with a lot of protein in it like that's a colloidal solution. It's got very large molecules suspended in it. And that's what the plasma is, and that's what our body fluids, period, are. Colloidal solutions, so they're all over the place. Many examples of colloidal solutions in everyday life, such as milk and mayonnaise and puddings and all kinds of stuff could be considered that. Gelatin. But our bodies are very much colloidal solutions.
basically
We'll just call it blood osmotic pressure, but the full name is blood colloidal pressure because the influence of proteins.
So all the different name changes is basically just location. It's the same thing, we're just going to call it something different because now it's
Yeah,
a particular location.
Yeah, throughout the blood system we would call blood pressure blood hydrostatic pressure.
Right. Or arterial pressure.
Well, no, you've got blood hydrostatic would be arterial, capillary, venous, all of that,
Okay.
all of it. But in the capillary specifically, the change in pressure there, we're going to call it capillary hydrostatic. I've called it blood hydrostatic before, but I'm trying to go with, I think your book calls it capillary.
Yeah.
Or what I call California Highway Patrol, CHP. But reabsorption is perhaps the harder part because that's the drawing or sucking of fluid back into the circulation, I'm going to put it that way, due to a greater osmotic pull on that side. So it's driven by osmosis. And the reason that osmosis works here so nicely is, again, because protein concentration of solutes, period, within the plasma is higher than in the interstitial fluids. Okay? Not that the interstitial fluids don't have an osmotic pressure. I don't include that, but it's very low and insignificant, but there is one there. The greater pull is within the blood, and that's why I don't put down the interstitial fluid osmotic pressure. So there's pressure on both sides. It's just the blood tends to have the greatest pull here. We're going to call it blood. We could call it BCOP, blood colloidal osmotic pressure, but I'm going to shorten it to blood osmotic pressure. And it has a measurable pressure and millimeters of mercury. You can measure it depending on the solute concentration. When I was in physiology, we did that a number of times. We calculate the osmotic pressure of a fluid by the amount of solute that's in it. That's how you do it. The greater solute that's in a fluid, the greater pull it has. It's an opposing pressure. So we'll say there are more complicated ways of defining osmotic pressure, but we'll say it's the pressure that draws water into the blood. And again, the biggest effect, everything affects it. Everything dissolved in the blood is going to affect it. The big difference in the plasma and the interstitial fluid outside is this greater amount of protein that the plasma has. You know, the biggest percentage of proteins are the albumins. So let's look at the animated drawing. First, we'll look at opposing pressures. Capillary hydrostatic pressure, of course, forces fluid out. Osmotic pressure forces it in. And here's an animated drawing of that. I think we looked at this last time, as I remember. CHP pushes outward, whereas the blood osmotic pressure, you're going to see the arrow going this way because that's going to pull fluid in. Here they seem to be equal. And there is a place along the capillary from one side to another where they are equal. They're not equal in the beginning. The blood first comes into the capillary, and they're not equal going out. And that's the big thing right there to understand the filtration as opposed to reabsorption. So here the pressures, the opposing pressures are, let's say, exactly equal. Hydrostatic pressure going out is equal to the osmotic pressure coming in. So we have fluids going out, and fluids coming back in at the same rate, but that's not true throughout the capillary. Now, what is this supposed to represent, that red circle? What? Section.
Cross-section.
A cross-section, that's all. And then we'll look at a longitudinal section in our drawing of it. So here we go with, we'll look at another view too. We'll look at what happens on the arterial side. That's where the blood first comes in to the capillary. Okay? Capillary hydrostatic pressure here, what does that sign mean? You can see it. Greater than blood osmotic. So the outward push, which would be the capillary hydrostatic, that's the pressure that pushes fluid out, is on the arterial side when you first come in, is going to be greater than the pull, blood osmotic pressure. So the net effect is for this outward push arrow to be greater. So you get more fluid going out than you could have coming back in. And you have a net filtering here, a net outflow of fluid. Now, you're not going to get it all back in this way, but on the venule side of that bed, look what happens. The pressures are reversed. The osmotic is higher than the capillary pressure. Why is that? Why has the one thing that has changed here to make this so is capillary hydrostatic. Is that blood flows? Yes.
I was just going to say that when it's coming from the larger into the smaller capillaries, the pressure is going to be greater. It's going to release, but then it's going to be able to reabsorb.
Right.
As it's flowing into the more open.
Exactly. So going through that capillary, not only is fluid being filtered out, it's meeting resistance and so on, so the capillary pressure declines. We'll see some figures from your textbook, which, by the way, are not always the same in every capillary bed. I want to make that clear. But it does show some differences in pressure. So the hydrostatic pressure is what's declining. It starts out above the osmotic, so you have this outward flow. But by the time you get to the outgoing side of the bed, the capillary hydrostatic has declined. The osmotic pressure is exactly the same as it was coming in, and thus the effect on that side is for the pulling pressure inward, that's the osmotic pressure, to exceed the push. And so now more fluid is pulled into the capillary than is going out. You might call it a suction pressure. It's not a very good term to use for that, I guess, but it helps you understand it. I think pull is a good one to use, but if you want to use a suction pressure, if you want to say the blood is like a sponge that draws fluid to it, then that's a way to look at it too. But on this incoming side, we have enough hydrostatic pressure to force some fluid out. Here we don't. I mean, some will go out, but the greater percentage will come in. And that's one view of it. Now watch this next animation that I put up here. This one, we have nice oxygenated blood coming in. This is the capillary, of course. This is the interstitial fluid, obviously. How do we know that? Because it says interstitial fluid. This is your plasma. I said blood capillary, but you could just as well put the word plasma in here because that's the one that has the greater protein concentration to it. I did put a lymph capillary here just to show that a percentage, about 15% of the fluid is picked up by the lymphatic capillaries on reabsorption. And we're going to see why in just a moment. But on the arterial end, we're going to see a lot of stuff happening right here when I click the clicker. You're going to see CHP plus 35 millimeters of mercury. When the blood pressure started out at the heart, the mean arterial pressure might have been nearly 100 millimeters mercury, but now it's fallen down all through the arterioles particularly. And before it got into this capillary, it's now 35 millimeters mercury. Is that the same in every capillary bed? No. Some are higher, some are lower, but that's a good average figure. Notice what the blood osmotic pressure, the pull pressure, is here, measured by the amount of concentration of proteins and so on. That effective pulling pressure is 25 millimeters mercury. Which one wins? By how much?
10.
Yeah, the effective filter, they call it effective filtration pressure or net filtration pressure. NFP or EFP, effective filtration pressure or net filtration pressure. Excuse me, folks. Are you hearing me okay back there? Sorry. That would be plus 10 millimeters. So that's going to force fluid out, filter it out, and make it available to the cell. We don't see here, but there'd be cells out here getting benefit from this filtration. Yes, ma'am.
So the effective filtration pressure, that's not either one, you're saying it's
No,
minus?
you sum them up. 35 minus 25 is
Okay,
10
so make sure
millimeters
they're
plus on the plus
Okay.
side.
Okay.
10 millimeters on the plus side for this one. I didn't include it in the drawing because you can put it in yourself if you need to do that to get a clear view of it, understanding. But that's the plus 10 is the effective filtration pressure, net filtration pressure that's going to force fluid out. Yeah, you still have some being pulled in, but more going out than coming in, believe me. So we're increasing the fluid into the interstitial fluids here, but we're going to solve that problem because we're going to draw back normally. If everything is working normally, which hopefully it usually is in your body, you're going to draw back equal amounts of fluid back into your circulation. The same volume that left is going to go back in. And how does that happen? Well, notice what happens. We're going to use lines to show the changes in pressure here. Notice what happens to capillary hydrostatic. 35, and it declines across the capillary bed down to, let's say, 18. That's usually a good figure for that. So it's dropped quite a bit there, as you can see. What is not dropped, though? Not under normal circumstances. There are circumstances where if you were losing a lot of protein, it would change, but it's not normally going to change significantly. That's the blood osmotic pressure. It's gone the same, from 25 over here to 25 over here. But the hydrostatic is dropped from 35 to 18. Now which is on top? Now which is the greater, the pull or the push? Pulling pressure, the osmotic pressure. By how much? Minus 7 millimeters. You plussed it over here, now it's negative over here. Because you have plus 25, 18. Yes?
This is just my thinking, which is why I got confused, but the VOP stays the same because it's the main osmotic pressure. Does the CHP change because it's going from a continuous to a fenestrated side of the capillary?
Well, there are a lot of effects that could affect that, such as the permeability of the capillary, how much fluid is coming out, and so on. But the main thing is just the fact that it's meeting resistance as it's going through the capillaries. There are a lot of capillaries to go through there, so it's meeting resistance before it comes out when you get into the side.
Because I mean, I know that it has the endothelium layer throughout the entire thing, but in order to reabsorb, it has to have the force to bring that in.
Yeah, and
So I figured
and
because
you're right,
now
the
you
amount of,
have,
the amount of filtration versus the amount of reabsorption is going to be affected by the type of catheter you're dealing with, that's for sure.
okay,
So it's not totally as simple as we're making it out, you understand
Right,
that.
okay.
But